IAB There. And now,
hi, everybody. Welcome to IAB There, our regular streaming show where we connect the digital advertising ecosystem. I'm Brad Behrens, editor-in-chief here at the IAB. Today, our topic is after COVID, what will life look like? And I'm very pleased that we're going to welcome two people onto the stream shortly. Jeffrey Cole is the founder and director and CEO of the Center for the Digital Future at USC Annenberg. For over 20 years, the center has been doing longitudinal research about the impact of technology on behavior. He's here not only to talk about that research, but an exciting new project, the Great COVID Reset, which we'll learn a lot about. We're in a turbulent time. We're in a transitional time. Things are changing. They're changing more quickly than we could possibly imagine. They're going to continue to change. How are business people and citizens of this country and the world supposed to get ready for a new normal that will not look like the old normal? We'll also be joined by IAB's EVP of Public Policy, Dave Grimaldi, who's joining us because in a leadership meeting the other day, he said, I have this question for Jeffrey Cole. And I said, well, you know, we're interviewing him on Thursday. Why don't you join the party? And he said, okay. So that's how we're here today. Let's have Jeff and Dave both join the stream. Jeffrey Cole, Dave Grimaldi, for both of you, welcome back to IAB There.
Brad, great to be here, or in the case of this, to be there. IAB There.
Well said. Thank you, Brad, for having me.
Dave, first question to you.
So a couple of, as far as my inquiry into what is going through Jeff's mind this week and this year after what we've seen with COVID destabilizing everything, the biggest news is Amazon's $8 billion acquisition of MGM. And Jeff, I think you have long wondered if Amazon, Apple, some of the other giant members of the club are going to buy a content company. It's on its way. How did this happen? Why was Amazon willing to step up and do this? And what does it mean going forward for streaming, content development and distribution, and all things in between?
Well, thanks, Dave. It's a great question. About 4 or 5 years ago, Rupert Murdoch, the most powerful man in the media and communication business, looked around and realized he had become a small player. And Rupert didn't get small. Everyone around him got big. All of a sudden, Fox couldn't compete with Disney or Netflix. They were $200 billion companies. And then you could begin to see Apple, now a $2 trillion company, Amazon, a $1.6 trillion company, Google and Facebook beginning to look at this industry. So the small guys realized they couldn't survive, and Rupert sold to Disney. But when you're talking about Amazon and Google and Apple, Netflix and Disney are the small guys. Think about AT&T paid $85 billion for Time Warner, in retrospect, a decision they deeply regret, but they spent about 40% of their capitalization on acquiring Time Warner. Jeff Bezos just spent $8.45 billion. That works out to less than half of 1% of what Amazon's worth. Bezos doesn't even have to have a compelling reason. This is a rounding error. The reason he did buy it is content. Amazon Prime has incredible reach, but it hasn't, other than Mrs. Maisel and 1 or 2 other things, it hasn't quite really gotten coveted content. This is his attempt to really begin. And I don't want to hog this, but the war is streaming. Pandemic changed everything. Movie theaters, if they come back, are going to be less than what they were. And the battle is streaming. And in my view, Americans are going to pay for 2.5 subscription streaming services. I think Netflix came out of the pandemic the most powerful entertainment company in history. They own the first dollar anyone spends on entertainment. And I think it's now HBO Max and Disney who are fighting over the other 1.5. And now this gives Amazon a foothold. But keep in mind, the stakes couldn't be smaller for Amazon. This is a fringe business, 0.5% of their value. Same issue with Apple and Apple TV Plus. They've never had much conviction because it's so small. But this is their attempt to really make a mark in streaming.
So I want
Brad,
to nod in because we're seeing, oh, go ahead, Dave, I'm
Can I
sorry.
throw in a follow-up? I swear I won't do this the whole, but I'm just, there's
Go
so
for
Oh,
much.
we could do this for hours and we
I know,
should, whether it's on camera or
I'll
not.
contain myself. I'll contain myself, I promise. Jeff, you in past years talked about Amazon's acquisition of the Washington Post.
Yes.
For what I think was
25,
200
well,
million.
actually, I don't mean to correct you, Dave, but importantly, Amazon didn't buy it. Bezos
Right.
bought it.
But correct.
There is a
correct myself
distinction
there.
he wants.
Bezos. Correct. He doesn't exercise editorial control. It's set off to the side. But still, Whole Foods, the Washington Post, MGM, delivery, stream, this could keep going. so
It
to speak.
will. He's picked up great brands. MGM is a shell of what it was, but it's still one of the great brands in entertainment. And he got James Bond and Rocky and other things with it. Whole Foods was a premier food company. The Washington Post, I mean, he picked up for $250 million. You know, the day he bought the Post, some former students of mine who work at the Post called me and said, "What do you think this means?" And I said, "I think you're the luckiest guys on the face of the earth. I think he bought it because he loved it and wanted to save it. He was friends with Donald Graham. I think the nerd in him, I said this when he bought it, the nerd in him will make him want to fix it, but he doesn't really care if he makes $50 million a year or loses 50 million. But if he loses 50 million, he may have to shut it down in 10,000 years. Well, he's actually invested and it's a better paper, winning Pulitzers, making money. And when he bought it for 250 million, he was worth 25 billion. It was 1% of his net worth. It's now not even 1/100th of his net worth, but he does really care about it.
So
And
let's
you're
put
right.
this in.
And he doesn't write the editorials, and he knew going in they would be harder on Amazon. Sorry.
Let's put this in a broader context, because not only did we have AT&T spinning out the Warner Media, combining it with Discovery, just a couple of weeks earlier, we had Verizon selling Yahoo and AOL, and this goes all the way back to AOL Time Warner. I mean, these tectonic shifts are not going away. So I guess my question is more broadly what's happening, but also in this to Jeff, and then Dave, I've got an antitrust follow-up to you, but to Jeff, what studios are left? Sony has said it's not selling Sony. Lionsgate seems to be out there, or are we seeing the end of the M&A?
Well, first, just one little footnote. I used to teach at the Anderson School at UCLA in business entertainment. And I argue there's almost never been a media merger that worked well. One of the exceptions was ABC Cap Cities in the 80s. That hasn't changed. These things rarely work out. Look at Warner Brothers has been through AOL, has been through AT&T. These things are so much ego and people wanting to be in the movie business, but they'll continue. Jeff Bezos is hardly a guy sitting on a turnip truck ready to be fleeced, but Sony does stand by itself, and it's not an issue of whether the electronics company wants to sell. They can't compete. They're smaller, much smaller than Rupert was, and Rupert knew he couldn't compete. So they're going to have to combine or do something. Paramount Viacom isn't big enough, and they're going to have to form some relationship, or Microsoft or Google or somebody else will come in. And Lionsgate is really a small but a really nice little player, and they are already on the market. So there's not much left to be snapped up. You may see recombinations the way AT&T unloaded Time Warner and made a partnership with Discovery. There's talk about Comcast combining with one of the others. But there will be, even though these things rarely work, they will continue until musical chairs is over and there's no one left to be standing.
So let's turn this to the Hill. Dave, Ken Buck, who's a representative Republican from Colorado, he's a senior member of the House Antitrust Committee, said publicly that he's deeply concerned about Amazon acquiring MGM. And Amy Klobuchar, who just wrote a book about antitrust and is the sponsor of a gigantic bill about it, has expressed that she's concerned about this. What do you think is going to happen on the Hill with regard to Amazon and MGM specifically, but also more generally? We've been hearing more and more about the possibility of a tech breakup, of Google being asked to spin off YouTube, Facebook being asked to spin off Instagram. Is that, in the first year of the Biden administration, do you think that there's any teeth in that?
Well, a lot of different directions to go in here. And let me start with this. There is nothing more sexy or populist to do inside the Beltway here in DC than bash technology companies, especially big tech. But it is also interesting to get people, congressional staff, members of Congress, to define big tech. Their definition is what you think it is. It is Apple, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Twitter in some instances. And it is the new black in DC. Just all roads lead back to some sort of maligning of those companies and the effect that they're having on the American online ecosystem, the electoral reasons leading up to the midterms, conservative bias, incitement of hate speech, the proliferation of all of this on platforms. So all of those comments now on a bipartisan basis, you will hear more of Republicans and Democrats. I don't see this marriage being stopped, though. Department of Justice will review it. The Federal Trade Commission will obviously take a look, have probably a good deal to say, being led by a pretty progressive acting chairwoman right now. When I was at the Federal Communications Commission, which looks at mergers in terms of their effect on the public interest, when Comcast acquired NBC, there was much discussion of, would a combined company favor NBC content to the detriment of small and mid-sized content creators, especially minority creators, African-American content creators, et cetera. But is the banging of the drum on this sale should not go through because Amazon has too much power in e-commerce, groceries and shipping, et cetera. And I think it was Josh Hawley, Republican senator from Missouri, who said they shouldn't be able to buy anything else, period. And bills are being introduced along those lines. But the Department of Justice will review this on its non-horizontal merger guidelines. And I think they'll find that MGM has a very tiny share of the overall box office, and streaming services are omnipresent. So it's a highly competitive market. And one thing, Brad, in putting a period on the end of this is the number one appointment that is central and important to American business and companies of this size right now has not been filled. And that is the Deputy Attorney General for Antitrust over at the Department of Justice. It is inquiring minds all over the Washington spectrum and corporate America are wondering, when is the president going to appoint that person to a role that is so outsized and influential in this discussion and debate and in so many others around the size of American companies and the monopoly power they have? That seat remains unfilled.
Well, we'll wait to bring you back onto IAB there once it does get filled. Jeff, let's turn to you with a kind of a bridge question, which is, we're interested in this question. IAB is interested in this question, but do Americans generally care about a tech breakup? Do you think that the average person is worried about whether or not these things have to be separated or not?
No, I don't think they care. Dave's comments were spot on. This has, incidentally, opposition has nothing to do with MGM. They're insignificant. This isn't restraining anything. This is anti-big tech, the one issue that unites the Republicans and the Democrats. To the average American, Facebook, Google, Amazon are companies that deliver great value. In the case of Google, this incredible search engine, the key to the world, which people use 50 times a day for free. The Facebook, which is central, people perceive as free. Amazon was the lifeline during the pandemic. So Americans love these companies, view them as good values, would worry about anything that might disturb that bargain. So they don't pay much attention to the antitrust, the restraint of trade issues. So to Americans, these are great companies, and let them continue to do what they do. And if they get bigger and it means better service and better pricing, I think most Americans are fine with it. That doesn't mean that they should be able to do that, but I think that's the popular point of view.
Well, let's take that as a bridge into the great COVID reset. You heard me talk briefly at the top of the program about what the center's been doing for the last 20 years, but the COVID reset project is different. So Jeff, what inspired it? Tell us about what it is and what you're finding.
Well, we've been living through the greatest disruption of our lifetime. We've been participating in the biggest social science experiment of all time, except nobody volunteered for it. So I think, and I don't mean to say this in a grandiose way, this is the first time since the end of the Second World War that we realize everything in our lives could change. We're going to rethink where and how we work and learn and how we buy and pay for it and travel and how we can, everything is on the table and may change. We think it's going to take 5 years to really understand the full extent of the change. So we've taken 7 areas of life: health and well-being, work, learning, how we shop and how we pay, homes, buildings, and communities, travel and entertainment, news and sports. And we've planted a flag for the next 5 years. We have about 40 global CEOs advising us, and we are going to be in the field continuously, but every quarter, we've already pulled our first quarter's data, went back in the field the next day. Every quarter, we're going to analyze what's changing. And of course, over the course of our project, COVID will recede. We'll see how quickly people resume activities, which changes are permanent. Do people go back to work in the movie theaters right away? Do they go back slowly? Do they not go back? But the best way to measure how everything is subject to change is to measure people over the next 5.
So 7 projects in the field 4 times a year. That's 28 surveys a year. That is a formidable endeavor. And who's helping you so far? You mentioned 40 CEOs.
Well, first, we're doing this with our research partner, Bovitz Research, who's managing the incredible logistics. Our CEOs are across the advertising, marketing, brand world, a couple college presidents, deans, journalists. And we're also, we're trying to get companies to where we are. We've done a pretty good job so far to work with us because they want good data and we want their insights as well.
So I'm going to ask you to give us some tidbits from the first round, which just came in. I had the great good fortune of skimming some of it, and it's remarkable stuff. And Dave, if you can listen attentively and let us know what sparks your interest in what you think might resonate in your world. But let's talk about, Jeff, let's talk about streaming. We know that it's exploded. Our CEO, David Cohen, calls it the industry rocket ship. Do you think anything's coming around to make people stream less?
Absolutely not. We asked people, what do you plan to do more of once the pandemic is over? And about 33% plan to go to the movies more, but that's off of a base of not going to the movies. But 45% believe after COVID, they're going to stream more, and that's off of a base of 8 to 10 hours a day. So, I mean, streaming has transformed the business. You know, during COVID, Disney reoriented their business so that streaming is at the center. So, but I mean, we have lots of insight into why people want to stream, why they want to go to the theater, why they don't want to go to the theater. But here's one simple piece of data that puts it all in perspective. We can go very deep and broad on this, but you ask people, a movie is released that you want to see. How do you want to watch it? 20% want to go to the theater. 70% want to stream it. 10% say some other way, which would be Redbox or DVD, or maybe they live next to the one Blockbuster still left in the world in
And hey,
Oregon.
Jeff,
Uh,
is there an economic element to that? I'm a purist. I've been going to movie theaters my whole life. I will continue to go. Footnote, Top Gun.
We looked at
Top Gun,
why
you'll see
people.
me there. But it's $40 now to bring your kids to the movie. Is that a concern?
Money is always an issue with going to the movies, and that was about fourth on the list of why people want to stream, because movies are too expensive. But much more significant is I found better ways to have the same experience during COVID. Also, I lost interest. I don't want to be around other people, and that doesn't mean just COVID people. That means talkers and all. So there was no, I mean, the bottom line is if you love theme parks or you love going to concerts, the experience during COVID was not very good. You know, the experience, you can't go to Disneyland at home, but the experience watching movies, considering that most new sets are 55 inches or bigger, was not just satisfying, it worked, it met the need. There's still 20% who believe we should go see movies, but to Steven Spielberg's great argument, and I really respect this, movies are meant to be seen on a big screen in a movie theater with other people. Only 21% of people buy that.
And just to nod in, it's I think that it's important to say to point out that movies don't have an audience problem. They have a revenue problem. Like people are interested in the content. It's sort of like newspapers. People are interested in the news. It's just that they're not necessarily interested in print on paper.
Point. And which is why we don't know that people are going to go back to the stadium to watch sports. But revenues from tickets is nice, but sports can live without in-person attendance. The real money comes from broadcast. Movies have to have people, movie theaters have to have people there or they disappear. It's absolutely right.
So let's move on to shopping, because I think there's a ton of data about shopping and why people shop. And Dave, I have a feeling you'll have a question or a comment on this one. But what do we find?
First, people tried COVID made us do all kinds of things we never wanted to do. Of the people who had never bought a thing online before March of 2020, within 4 weeks, 37% of them were buying online. People were buying groceries and delivery food for the first time. And when you talk to people, we all want to get out of the house. We've all been in prison. We want to go back to malls. We want to go back to stores and touch things, but we want to go back for the social experience. Our work suggests that the gains of e-commerce are permanent, and we're going to go back to the stores to be in that ambiance or environment, but the buying is going to really shift to online.
And, Jeff, I completely agree. Congress wants people back in the stores and in the malls, stimulate the economy, help small and mid-sized businesses get out there and just hand cash over to merchants. But to your point about what streaming has done and the online mega boom in buying in e-commerce, I would be negligent in not saying, with the industry that I represent, the massive amount of that is free and ad supported, which enabled people to teleconference, homeschool, order food, all of it, or the great majority, supported by online ads, which kept it free and easy to do. So
You're
we take
completely right. And, going back, and that's why, they love Google and Facebook as well, which are ads supported. The only thing you said that you weren't saying it to make a point, but I don't think they're going to be handing over cash, Dave. We didn't want to go cashless. We're a country that won't even get rid of the penny, the world's most worthless piece of metal, but we have been forced to go cashless. In the beginning, people didn't want to touch cash because they were afraid it contained the virus. Merchants, many of them wouldn't take it, wanted contactless. We've really made a shift. And we're not going to see cash eliminated, but we've really made a shift. Most of us, I'm an example of somebody who used to go to the ATM every 2 weeks to load up. I now go about every 2 months. We're really moving away, but we're not moving away from buying things.
And Jeff, to that point, just a small footnote, Apple, the big winner there with Apple Pay, they really
Apple's a big winner. PayPal been a very big winner as well. I mean, the winners that almost every tech company, the whole point of the pandemic, in our internet work, I call COVID the victory lap of the internet. We had 3 days to get our lives, learning, work, buying online. What couldn't be done online couldn't be done. So any electronic payment, but Apple, yes, a very big winner. But PayPal,
And just to build on that, the center did a future of money and banking study that I was part of a couple of years ago. And one of the findings from that study, Dave, was that different payment services are generational. So for PayPal's been around the longest, has the most traction with older folks. Gen Z are very involved with Venmo, right? There's a strangely generational quality to what payment services apply and appeal to which people. But since we're on money, Jeff, we've been hearing a lot about revenge spending, about pent-up demand. For the people who have money and have been trapped at home, they're ready to spend. For the people who don't have money, they're hopefully going to be getting money from the $2 trillion stimulus package. What's the shape of spending in the next 6 to 8 months?
All the attention has appropriately been on those who lost their jobs, had to cut back, on ones who may not, have had a reprieve from eviction, but may face that soon. That is where the attention belongs, and the stimulus was aimed at. But what hasn't been reported, and it doesn't, is those of us who kept our jobs. We've accumulated massive amounts of money. We haven't traveled. We haven't gone out to eat. Many of us, the savings rate is high. We've paid off more debt than we've ever paid in 1 year in the last 30 years. So we think that this is the roaring 20s again. We think there's going to be massive spending. You're already seeing it on travel. Prices have gone through the roof, the demand to travel. We think you're going to see it on clothes. We think people are going to go out, party, elegant gowns. We think there's going to be an enormous spending explosion, and you can begin to see it all. But of those, there are still those who really did suffer. But a lot of money is sitting, waiting to be spent.
So, Dave, let's kick this to you. The Biden administration has proposed an almost $2 trillion stimulus package. It's receiving not a lot of support from the opposition party. What do you think the shape of the stimulus is likely to be? I think that we will have one. I suspect it may not be $2 trillion.
Correct. I think that's right. And this again breaks down to positioning before the midterm congressional elections. Razor thin margin in the House of Representatives for Republicans to take it back. Is there populist gains in opposing something that big? It is an enormous price tag, but you look at the affected industries. You look at restaurants. You look at small businesses. You look at people needing an immediate cash infusion. You look at the shuttered businesses. And the president is doing this in a way that is methodical, that dots I's and crosses T's. It's not something that he is looking for a pat on the back. He's looking to prop American businesses back up again. He is somebody who comes from a pretty modest lifestyle with a working family growing up. So it's a little bit in his DNA. And I think, though, that it will be like everything else here. Sadly and pathetically, it will break down on fighting over party lines to position for the next election cycle that's going to rev back up again in about 5 months. So you talk to our friends in these affected industries and these affected associations that oversee movie theaters, concert venues, restaurants, et cetera. They need the money. It's not a joke. They have laid off workforces. They're slowly trying to hire them back. But as Jeff said, we have just come through a year that nobody prepared for, could have prepared for. It's unprecedented, and the recovery is going to take years to come.
And
So-
one of the parties will oppose all of this to be able to show it to their support base, but will then brag to their constituents what they've delivered when the other party passes it.
So just as a sidebar on the question of whether or not we could have prepared for it, I just finished reading the Michael Lewis book, The Premonition, a pandemic story. And you might enjoy it, Dave, because it suggests that we might have prepared in a different alternate universe where Spock has a beard and things were a little bit different. So it's a well worth a read. Last question to Jeff. You're going back into the field. You're already back in the field.
Yeah.
You've just poured over all of the results, some remarkable things. 40% of Americans are open to having a chip implanted in their finger if they don't have to, if it meant they didn't have to have car keys or passports or credit cards anymore. As you're going back into,
amazed at that, yeah.
It's a huge finding, particularly given the privacy conversation that we're having elsewhere in our culture. But as you're going back into the field, what's the question that you're like, how is this one going to change? Like, where do you think there's going to be the most movement, and why are you curious?
Well, first, very briefly, our first quarter, we had a population that was 9% fully vaccinated, 9% partially. When we pull our second quarter, it's probably going to be 55%. So the really big question is, how does vaccination, which things do we go back to quickly, and where are we still hesitant? There are people who don't want to take their masks off. But the most interesting question, Brad, is we found in our work last summer, when people in an office, when asked, what do you want to do when COVID's over? 10% said, I want to go back just like before. 30% said, I never want to go back. And 60% said, I want to go back on some hybrid model. I don't think 30 really will never go back. I think we'll miss the workplace, the social element. I think some people may feel the ones who come in will have an advantage in getting promoted and the ones who do it through Zoom will be second class. But that's the most interesting issue this fall. We know kids are going back to school. There's no debate there, but we don't know. I'm doing this right now in New York City, and in the city, and this is true of most big cities, in the city, the restaurants are crawling with people, the noise, the excitement, the streets are mobbed, but people are not in the offices. That's what's different. And that's the issue. Are employers going to require their teams to come back? Are employers going to require vaccinations? I think this is the big issue for the rest of the year. What's going to happen to work? We know what's happening to education. So that's what we're going to track particularly carefully.
And that's a great place for us to end. For those people who are interested in learning more about the Great COVID Reset Project, reach out to Jeff, take a look at digitalcenter.org. Jeffrey Cole, Dave Grimaldi, thank you so much for joining us on IAB There. I really appreciated this conversation.
Thank you, Brad. And thank you, Dave. Really great to see you.
Indeed. Good to see you, Jeff.
So, IAB There is a production of the Interactive Advertising Bureau. Our show today was produced by Connor Healy, James Linney, Joe Pilla, and Loretta Bain. I'm Brad Behrens, Editor-in-Chief here at the IAB. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.